It's mysterious, hints at tension, and instantly draws the audience in. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind that usually blended into the background of routine chores and small talk, until she walked in. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman, my stepmom's best friend, moved into the living room with a presence that somehow filled it without any effort. Her long black hair cascaded in gentle waves over her shoulders, catching the sunlight that streamed through the wide windows. Her lightly tanned skin glowed softly, and subtle freckles dusted across her nose and cheeks gave her a youthful warmth that contrasted with the maturity of her soft laugh lines. She wore a fitted cream blouse tucked neatly into tailored navy slacks, her curvy figure and graceful posture emanating quiet confidence. From the first glance, there was a magnetic tension in the air, a subtle pull I didn't fully understand. Her dark brown eyes met mine briefly, holding a warmth that seemed both friendly and inexplicably personal. In that single glance, there was a story untold, an invitation unspoken, and I felt it more profoundly than any casual greeting should have warranted. My chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from awareness, an acute sense of the energy between us, the gentle charge that pulsed in the small distance separating us. She smiled lightly, the corners of her lips curving in a manner that suggested familiarity yet retained an air of mystery. The soft smile lines at the corners of her eyes deepened just enough to make her expression feel genuine and approachable. Even the faint scent of her perfume, a subtle mix of floral and musk, was somehow magnified in the quiet room, drawing me in without a word. It was disarming, and I became acutely aware of every detail, the delicate movement of her hands as she brushed them along the edge of the sofa, the faint rustle of her blouse, the rhythm of her breathing as she settled into a chair. There was a casual elegance in the way she carried herself, a confidence that didn't need to dominate the space but instead invited attention naturally. I couldn't help but notice the careful way she aligned her posture, the subtle tilt of her head as she scanned the room, the faint glimmer of curiosity in her eyes as they returned to me. Each movement seemed deliberate yet effortless, creating an unspoken dialogue that pulled me into her orbit without a single word being exchanged. Even though it was our first real interaction, the air between us felt familiar, as if some unspoken understanding existed beyond the boundaries of normal acquaintance. I was conscious of the way my own body responded, slightly tense, alert, aware of every subtle cue she offered. The moment, though simple in its outward appearance, carried a weight I could neither define nor ignore. By the time the conversation had started, I was already aware that this encounter would linger in my mind far longer than the afternoon itself. The magnetic pull, the quiet confidence, the subtle warmth in her gaze, all combined to leave an impression that felt both fleeting and indelible. That single, unexpected encounter had set the stage for something far more significant, and I couldn't yet predict how deeply it would affect me. After the initial greeting, the room settled into a quieter rhythm, but the tension between us didn't fade, it shifted, became more subtle, more charged in ways that were impossible to ignore. The 40-year-old American Latina woman, my stepmom's best friend, lingered near the coffee table, her long black hair catching the sunlight and glinting with each subtle movement. Her lightly tanned skin glowed warmly, accented by faint freckles across the bridge of her nose and cheeks, and her soft laugh lines added a maturity and warmth that made her presence both commanding and approachable. Her cream blouse and navy slacks moved effortlessly with her, each gesture graceful, natural, and yet somehow captivating. Her eyes found mine again, dark brown, intense, and alive with unspoken curiosity. She held my gaze a fraction longer than normal, just enough to make my heart rate spike, my palms grow slightly clammy. It wasn't a glance that screamed flirtation, but it was undeniably personal, intimate in a way that felt both thrilling and inappropriate at the same time. The corners of her lips curved into a small, knowing smile as if she noticed the same tension I felt but chose to let it hover in the room, unacknowledged yet unmistakable. Every subtle movement she made, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, leaning lightly against the table, shifting her weight from one foot to another, was a whisper of her presence, a quiet assertion that she was fully aware of the impact she had on me. When she handed me a stack of papers, our fingers brushed lightly, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt of warmth up my arm. The texture of her skin, smooth yet slightly warm, lingered in my memory long after she had withdrawn her hand. The moment was brief, almost accidental, but it carried a weight far beyond its simplicity. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, floral with an earthy undertone, curling around the edges of the room and embedding itself into my awareness. Each small sensory detail, touch, scent, gaze, built a web of intimacy that made the air between us almost tangible. Even as we spoke in casual tones about mundane topics, I found myself acutely aware of every micro-expression she offered, the subtle lift of her eyebrows, the way her dark eyes glimmered when amused, the soft exhale that punctuated her pauses. She seemed equally conscious of me, of the way I shifted in my seat, the way my hands fiddled with the papers, the small gestures betraying my nervous excitement. The shared awareness created a rhythm, a dance of glances and pauses, small touches and fleeting proximity. By the time our brief interaction ended, the effect lingered. I was left conscious of the warmth of her presence, the magnetic pull of her gaze, and the realization that these lingering glances were more than casual. They were invitations, subtle yet deliberate, to notice each other in ways we hadn't yet dared to explore. The room, once ordinary and quiet, had become charged with emotion, anticipation, and the faint, thrilling sense that something significant had begun, even if either of us fully understood it yet. The air between us shifted again, this time with a lighter, more playful energy. A small mishap, a misfiled document, perhaps, or a forgotten note, sparked a teasing exchange that neither of us could ignore. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman, my stepmom's best friend, leaned slightly over the desk to correct it, her long black hair sweeping across her shoulder. She wore the same cream blouse and navy slacks, her lightly tanned skin glowing in the sunlight that poured through the windows, highlighting the subtle freckles across her nose and cheeks. Her dark brown eyes sparkled with mischief, and the soft laugh lines around them deepened as she offered a teasing remark, her tone light but layered with warmth. Her presence was magnetic, as always, but in this moment, the playful energy made it almost impossible to ignore the way I was drawn in. Each gesture, each tilt of her head, seemed choreographed by the universe to keep me aware of her. When she reached for a pen I had absent-mindedly placed in the wrong spot, our fingers brushed lightly. The contact was fleeting but electric, a warmth that traveled along my arm and settled in my chest. She didn't pull away abruptly. Instead, her hand lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, a subtle signal that heightened the tension beneath the laughter. Her laugh was soft but genuine, carrying an easy confidence that contrasted beautifully with the faint vulnerability that occasionally flickered in her eyes. The corners of her lips lifted in a natural curve, and I caught the slight crinkle near her eyes that came only with authentic amusement. Every nuance, the tilt of her head, the rise of her eyebrows, the warmth in her voice, pulled me closer emotionally, even as we maintained the polite distance imposed by circumstance. The playful banter created a rhythm, a back and forth that allowed us to exist in a shared space with both comfort and tension. I noticed how her posture subtly mirrored mine at times, leaning just slightly when I leaned, tilting her head when I did, a subconscious alignment that made the world feel smaller, more intimate. The sunlight falling across the room highlighted her mature, graceful figure, the subtle curves emphasized by the tailored lines of her clothing. Her lightly tanned skin glimmered in the soft afternoon light, and her long black hair moved gently as she shifted positions. Despite the light-hearted tone, the undercurrent of awareness between us was palpable. The lingering glances, the accidental touches, the soft laughter, they were all small, deliberate threads weaving a connection that neither of us could deny. In those moments, I became aware of the pull of age-gap attraction, the magnetic curiosity of someone older, wiser, confident yet approachable. Her every expression, every gesture, felt intentional and natural at the same time, layering the emotional intimacy over the playful banter. By the end of the interaction, the warmth lingered, a gentle hum in the air. The playful teasing had not dissipated the tension. Instead, it had sharpened it, made it more real, more human. I left the room with a heightened awareness of her presence, the memory of her dark brown eyes sparkling with amusement, her soft laugh lines deepening with humor, and the unspoken connection that had begun to form in those fleeting, delightful moments. The room had settled into a quiet rhythm after our playful exchange, but the tension lingered, invisible yet palpable. It was in these quiet moments that the 40-year-old American Latina woman, my stepmom's best friend, became even more magnetic. Her long black hair caught the light from the wide windows, each strand gleaming as she moved with effortless grace. She wore her cream blouse and navy slacks, the fabric hugging her curves in a way that spoke to her natural elegance without being provocative. Her lightly tanned skin seemed almost luminous in the afternoon sunlight, freckles dotting her cheeks and nose, soft laugh lines framing her mouth, and dark brown eyes that held both warmth and an unspoken intensity. The first subtle touch came as naturally as breathing. She leaned over the desk to adjust a stack of papers or point at a note, and our hands brushed lightly. The contact was accidental, or at least it felt that way, but the warmth of her skin against mine sent a surprising jolt through me. It was a fleeting touch, a whisper of contact, but it carried more meaning than words ever could. I felt a subtle heat rise in my chest, a quickened heartbeat, and a strange awareness of every detail: the smoothness of her skin, the slight pressure of her fingertips, the faint scent of her perfume lingering on her wrist. Even as I tried to remain composed, the world seemed to narrow to that single, electric moment. She looked up from her work, her dark brown eyes meeting mine, holding just a fraction longer than was necessary. There was a quiet question in her gaze, a recognition of the tension that neither of us had yet dared to acknowledge aloud. The corners of her lips lifted slightly, subtle and teasing, soft smile lines deepening, conveying warmth, familiarity, and just the faintest hint of curiosity. She shifted, brushing her hair back from her face, a casual gesture that felt loaded with intimacy in its simplicity. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate in their grace, and every subtle action seemed to draw me further into her orbit. The sunlight illuminated the curve of her shoulders, the gentle sway of her stance, the poised elegance of her mature figure. Each detail, the delicate tilt of her head, the gentle lift of an eyebrow, the small, confident smile, added layers to the unspoken conversation between us. In that moment, the ordinary office felt charged, transformed into a space of quiet intimacy. Words were unnecessary. The brush of our hands, the shared glances, the proximity of our bodies spoke volumes. I became acutely aware of the age gap dynamic, not in a way that felt inappropriate, but in a way that highlighted the depth of her experience and the grace with which she carried herself. There was curiosity, attraction, and admiration all woven into one fleeting exchange. Even after she withdrew her hand, the warmth remained, lingering like an echo in the space between us. My mind replayed the touch, the glance, the subtle energy of the room, understanding that something significant had shifted. That first subtle touch had opened a door to a slow, deliberate intimacy, a connection layered with respect, curiosity, and a magnetic tension that promised more moments like this in the days to come. After the subtle touch and lingering glances, the room felt charged even when she had stepped away to answer a phone call or rearrange some papers. I sank into my chair, mind racing, aware of a warmth in my chest that wasn't just from the sunlight pouring through the windows. Thoughts collided: admiration, curiosity, and a kind of hesitant longing, all tempered by the knowledge that she was my stepmom's best friend, a 40-year-old woman with a graceful, mature presence that carried both confidence and quiet vulnerability. Her long black hair, her lightly tanned skin dotted with subtle freckles, her soft laugh lines and dark brown eyes, all of it replayed in my mind in vivid detail, every nuance heightened by the intensity of the moment we'd shared. I tried to rationalize the sensations, labeling them as fleeting or accidental. Yet the way her fingers had brushed mine, how her gaze had lingered, how her smile had hinted at curiosity, it all felt deliberate in a way that pulled at me. My heart thumped in quiet rebellion against logic, and my mind couldn't ignore the magnetic energy she seemed to radiate, a pull both tantalizing and forbidden. There was an unspoken recognition in her eyes, a spark that made it impossible to dismiss the moment as ordinary. As I replayed her expressions, I noticed the subtleties I had missed in the rush of the encounter: the slight tilt of her head when she laughed, the gentle way she shifted her weight while standing, the curve of her lips when she smiled softly. Each detail added layers to the image of her in my mind, a vision both alluring and comforting. I felt conflicted, knowing that acknowledging my attraction openly was fraught with complexity, yet unable to ignore the stirrings of fascination and admiration. There was also a quiet self-awareness, an understanding that this attraction was entwined with the age gap, with the social context, with the unspoken boundaries of family and friendship. Every glance, every accidental touch, was amplified by the knowledge of those boundaries, making the tension richer, more layered, and emotionally intricate. I found myself analyzing her words and gestures, wondering which were purely casual and which carried hints of deeper connection. Even as I wrestled with propriety and curiosity, a small part of me reveled in the intimacy of the moment, the shared smiles, the fleeting physical contact, the unspoken recognition of something delicate forming between us. I realized that desire didn't always need to be acted upon to be meaningful. It could exist in the subtle gestures, the silent acknowledgments, and the quiet energy of proximity. By the time she returned to the room, poised and composed, the internal conflict had settled into a quiet hum. My awareness of her presence had deepened, tempered by hesitation but colored with fascination. The tension between us was no longer just in fleeting touches or glances. It had become something more profound, a slow-burning curiosity, an emotional connection that neither of us could easily define. And I knew, even as the day continued, that the memory of that moment would linger, guiding the unspoken dance between us in the days to come. The afternoon carried on, but the quiet energy between us had shifted into something unmistakably tangible. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but the room felt different, warmer somehow, as though the very air had absorbed the tension from our previous interactions. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman, my stepmom's best friend, moved gracefully across the room, her long black hair sweeping lightly over her shoulders. She wore her cream blouse tucked into navy slacks, her lightly tanned skin glowing under the sunlight streaming through the wide windows. Subtle freckles dotted her cheeks and nose, and the soft laugh lines around her mouth deepened as she smiled gently. Her dark brown eyes held a warmth and quiet curiosity that made the space between us feel charged, alive, and intimate without a word being spoken. The shared moment came unexpectedly, in the simplest of gestures. Perhaps she reached for the same pen I had, or leaned toward the desk to examine a document, and our hands touched again, this time a little longer, a little closer than before. The warmth of her skin against mine was subtle, but electric. I felt it travel along my arm, settling into a quiet heat in my chest that made the world seem simultaneously larger and more concentrated on that single point of contact. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, her fingers lingered just long enough to make my pulse quicken, as if acknowledging the unspoken tension that had been building between us. Our eyes met, dark brown eyes locking for a heartbeat, and in that silent exchange, there was understanding. Neither of us spoke, yet the connection was profound. The corners of her lips lifted in a small, knowing smile, the subtle lines near her eyes deepening in a way that conveyed warmth, amusement, and just the faintest hint of curiosity. Her posture was relaxed but attentive, shoulders slightly forward, head tilted ever so gently, signaling openness and engagement. Every micro-expression, every subtle gesture, communicated more than words could, the shared awareness of proximity, the quiet acknowledgement of something unspoken but mutual. I noticed the details that made her presence so magnetic. The way her long black hair reflected the sun, the gentle sway of her stance, the soft warmth radiating from her skin, the graceful curves of her figure highlighted by her clothing. Even as my mind raced with questions and curiosity, the moment itself demanded focus, inviting me to exist fully in this quiet, shared connection. It was a delicate balance, intimacy without overt action, tension without pressure, and an unspoken acknowledgement of attraction tempered by awareness of boundaries. The room seemed to shrink around us, the bright sunlight enhancing the softness of the scene, highlighting every curve, every gesture, every small, meaningful glance. By the time the moment passed, a subtle shift had occurred. We had shared something private yet entirely innocent, an understanding that left both of us aware of the tension but comfortable within it. That shared connection, fleeting as it was, lingered in the air, weaving itself into the fabric of our interactions, promising that every future encounter would carry a quiet, slow-burning intimacy, full of curiosity, admiration, and unspoken emotion. As the afternoon waned and sunlight poured through the windows, the room settled into a quiet calm. The 40-year-old American Latina woman, my stepmom's best friend, had returned to her routine, moving with the same graceful ease that had captivated me from the first moment. Her long black hair fell over her shoulders, subtly shifting with each movement, and her lightly tanned skin glowed warmly in the fading sunlight. Freckles dusted her cheeks, and soft laugh lines marked her mature, confident beauty. Her dark brown eyes occasionally glanced my way, brief yet meaningful, hinting at the shared understanding that had developed over the course of the afternoon. There was no dramatic conclusion, no confession or overt declaration, just a quiet recognition of the connection that had grown between us. The tension that had built in lingering glances, playful banter, and subtle touches now settled into a soft, unspoken intimacy. Each of her movements carried a gentle awareness of me, a calm acknowledgement of our shared moments. She adjusted a paper here, reached for a pen there, and every action was infused with the grace and confidence that made her presence unforgettable. I sat back, quietly observing, aware of the warmth lingering from our earlier exchanges. Her gaze had softened slightly, and when our eyes met, there was a silent acknowledgement, a mutual recognition that something meaningful had passed between us without a single word. The subtle curve of her lips, the faint sparkle in her dark brown eyes, the gentle tilt of her head, all conveyed a calm satisfaction, an unspoken understanding that the afternoon had shifted the boundaries of our acquaintance in a quiet but profound way. Even in this calm, I noticed the nuances that made her so compelling, the way her long black hair caught the sunlight, the curve of her shoulders as she leaned over the desk, the warmth of her skin as she moved through the space, and the rhythm of her breathing as she settled into her tasks. Every detail seemed magnified, heightened by the shared moments of proximity, and the lingering tension that had softened into a comforting awareness. There was also a reflective quality to the moment, an internal acknowledgement of the age gap dynamic, of social boundaries, and of the respect that framed our interaction. Her maturity, poise, and quiet vulnerability blended into an emotional depth that left me both fascinated and contemplative. I realized that attraction didn't need to be overt to be meaningful. It could exist in glances, in small touches, in shared laughter, and in moments of mutual understanding. As the day drew to a close, I left the room carrying the memory of her presence, the warmth of her hand, the sparkle in her dark brown eyes, the graceful sway of her figure, and the quiet intimacy that had formed between us. She returned to her work, poised and composed, yet with a small, lingering smile that suggested she too remembered, too felt, and too valued the subtle connection we had shared. That quiet resolution left both of us changed, aware of an invisible thread linking us, promising that future encounters would carry the memory, the tension, and the warmth of this slow-burning, respectful, and deeply human attraction.